Hey everyone, this is Rico Figliolini, host of Peachtree Corners Life. Today's show is Prime Lunchtime with City Manager Brian Johnson. Thank you, Brian, for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Love doing this Facebook Live and doing this right after the City Council meeting because all sorts of neat things happen at the council meeting. And we get to talk about that. We get to talk about city issues, about things going on, about things coming up, about all the good things. In fact, just to quote Mike Mason, the mayor, he said, cities can flourish and cities can flounder. This city has been flourishing, it seems. City council meeting had some people showed up about an issue that has lasted for 2 years, I think. 3 years maybe? 2 years roughly, I guess, about the Pedestrian Bridge, which has evolved. And it's good citizen input, I think, that started originally, good public meetings that actually evolved this bridge to something probably better and more economical than what it was before. And I was, just listening, watching, and reading stuff on Nextdoor about, people signing petitions against the pedestrian bridge, which has already been funded, already been voted on, had more than its usual number of public meetings to deal with the issue. And there were 600 people that signed the petition, or 600 plus, and maybe about 30 people that showed up in red shirts on Tuesday night. But just to clarify so then everyone understands, it's been approved, it's been budgeted, and anything going on?
And it's under design.
Under design. So eventually, we should see a finalized design of what it really would look like, I guess?
Yeah, we're going to, the design is generally more about the details than the conceptual. The conceptual look is the final version that council looked at. So you've kind of seen it. It's the,
so we have that.
Yeah, what is it called? It's called, there's an architectural term, but it has the arched truss.
Right.
To a degree similar to Jones Bridge itself.
Right, so inspired by
it, right. Mm-hmm. And, so that's the latest one. It is to your point, it's a much more scaled down version of what was initially socialized about 3 years ago. And, it's probably been through more public meetings, discourse, and debate than any other single transportation project that we've ever had.
Yeah, I cannot think of anything else that has lasted longer and has been, beat to death.
And, like any project where you have the expenditure of public funds, there are going to be people who think that that's a good use of the money and people who don't. And that goes for everything. It could be a sidewalk, it could be a resurfacing, it could be anything. Rarely do you get something that everybody is like, yes, that's the best use.
Oh, absolutely.
So the fact that some people, and really most of the debate centers around whether a bridge should go in versus tunnel, or whether a bridge should go in that location versus another one.
Yeah. Most
of the debate is not centered around whether separating pedestrians from vehicles at the same grade. Most of the debate is not that that's not a good thing. That they're saying, oh, no, it's okay for pedestrians to have to cross a road, a busy road, especially like 141, at the same grade as cars. There will never be an interaction.
That's just silly. And,
it is.
And I could see people when I stop at a red light in my car, because I don't think I've ever crossed the road by foot in that area. I may eventually, if I had dinner at one place and want to cross over, but I've never done that. But I've seen people.
Yeah, there hasn't really been a need much until the town center. Anyway, it's mostly been you're either at the Forum or there hasn't really been much else on the other side of the road. Right. But anyway, so 3 years ago, the city unveiled some plans to do a pedestrian bridge, and they kind of socialized a number of different variations of it, and it got mixed reviews, and there's some pushback, and it was based on lots of things, including cost and the scope, the sheer size of
the grandiosity of it.
Right, and that's fair.
Grandiose.
Grandiosity is that's exactly right. So that's fair. And so what I would hope the residents of Peachtree Corners would appreciate is the fact that mayor and council heard the community's input and then pulled back and said, wait a second, if we're getting this kind of feedback and pushback on that, we need to revisit it. And about then is when I got here. And so I was tasked with kind of going back and figuring out a way to make this, to achieve the same objective, which is to separate pedestrians from cars for two reasons. One is safety, clearly, and the other one is also the congestion component.
Sure.
We've talked about it before, is if you're at an at-grade pedestrian crossing that has a pedestrian actuated button that you can, stop the traffic signal, red light, so that you can cross. And there's varying differences in time, but I know the East Jones Bridge, Medlock Bridge intersection with 141, if a pedestrian pushes the crosswalk, the light on the north-southbound traffic is red almost 50, as in 50 seconds longer than if it was just the normal cycle. So if you're heading north or southbound, which most traffic is, that can be infuriating. If the light turns red, you sit there and you see the traffic on the cross street empty out.
Right. And then
you're still sitting there.
Yeah.
And you're sitting there and you're sitting there. And that's because, they have to, the distance to cross that road is long enough, and they've got to have it because there's no pedestrian refuge island in the middle. They have to make sure that everybody of all
ages,
physical abilities, including like Aunt Mabel, who may be on a walker, has got to give her a reasonable chance to get across the road. And so the other reason to separate pedestrians from cars is that congestion factor. So when we do this, we will not only offer a grade separated option, but we'll actually make it the only option, because we will remove the at-grade pedestrian opportunity.
Really?
So you will not be able to cross at grade, even if you were jaywalking per se.
Where the bridge would be, you mean?
Where the bridge area, well, that's correct.
Not the corners, not CVS or the QT side. In the middle of that stretch.
It appears what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to eliminate the at-grade crossings at Peachtree Corner Circle in 141.
Oh, really?
And Town Center Boulevard in 141, or Forum Drive.
Okay.
Because those are going to be on each side of where the pedestrian bridge is. It'll be in between those.
So you're going to force that?
We're going to remove the ability to cross over. So we'll end up putting in some sort of a impediment in the median. It could be shrubs that you wouldn't want to walk through. It could be
what about the curb cuts for people? There's
going to be
corner curb cuts.
Well, there could be cars are going to still have to do it. So I guess theoretically, if somebody still wanted to run across at the intersection itself, not using the median, they could. But that's really playing Frogger in real life. I mean, that's
so those crosswalks essentially will go away.
And you will need to use it because the bridge is right there.
Yeah,
it's right between.
It's funny. I've never seen. I'm trying to remember if I've ever seen an intersection with no crosswalks.
With a pedestrian bridge, sure.
Really?
There's not a lot of pedestrian bridges, so you got to pay attention. But if you have a grade separated option, you don't want to give people the option to do it at grade still, because people will still be lazy and they'll go and use the option that requires the least effort.
Right.
So if you did, because we're removing the pedestrian actuated signal, so you won't be able to stop the signal. There won't be the counter anymore. And I guess there's no way to prevent somebody from just being really foolish and trying to run across without any help of
I can imagine the Norcross track team, and I think Wesleyan too, they run through the areas, and they usually cross that way. I've seen the kids do that. They'll have to actually cross the bridge then, instead of doing that.
Or continue to run down up to Spalding or East Jones Bridge, Medlock. You could cross there too.
Now, so not to belabor the point, but so the bridge part is where you would be able to cross, but so eventually, if I understand correctly, a year or so afterwards, pedestrian sloped or ADA compliant sloped walkways will be sort of part of the bridge, will be amended to the bridge. What do you call that?
Well, ramps. I mean, there will be some ramps.
Well, ramps
some
is like
approaches.
a little thing, but usually it's an extended. This would be an extended ramp.
Well, it is because the bridge, the height of the bridge, and you've got to do, what is it, like a 3-to-1 slope to be able to. So, yes, there are in the plans ramps on either side, so that a bicycle. Cyclists could go up there. Somebody in a wheelchair, any of those kind of things with wheels could use that versus having to either carry it up the stairs or use the elevator.
So those ramps, I think, in the design almost go out to the corner practically.
It's big. It's got to be kind of meandering because you've got to use you can't go too steep, so you've got to take up a lot of real estate to kind of get up to that level. Now, those approaches, if done to the degree with the, ultimately the aesthetic improvements made to it, are between $3 and $4 million in and of themselves, and so we've not put that templated in there on phase one for two reasons. One is it's just more, and we'll, that at least, maybe there's not as much need, who knows. But the other reason is we initially templated, or I guess appropriated $8 million into our capital improvement our 5-year CIP plan.
Right.
And that $8 million, of all that money, $8 million of it went to pedestrian improvements, which all could have gone to one bridge with all the accoutrements, like the ramps, or I was able to, through some value engineering, including having the span itself prefabricated off-site.
Right, I remember that.
Was able to get the cost of the bridge at $4 million. So without the ramps. So we might be able, so mayor and council at a certain point are going to consider whether to push the ramps off a little bit longer and use the other $4 million of that to potentially do another pedestrian bridge at another location.
And I think that's what some of the protesters or opponents to the bridge were talking about, that it was, if we were going to have one, the best place would be the second place that's actually in the master plan, I think, or the comprehensive plan, which is down by the Target and Holcomb Bridge Road.
There is a reference in a couple of our plans of a need for a pedestrian crossing improvements to be made down near the Dick's Sporting Goods Target area near Holcomb Bridge.
I thought that was labeled as a bridge.
They don't generally. It's just grade separated because it can be a tunnel in some cases too. Okay. Johns Creek has a grade separated crossing under 141. Most people don't know that it's there.
Right, and we discussed that doing a tunnel probably in this area probably wouldn't be something that would be attractive or valued.
Well, it's a little bit more expensive in this location due to the utility conflicts that are already there and some of the topographical challenges. But the other thing that you give up, even if it was a dollar for dollar the exact same, is a tunnel not only sometimes has the perception of being less safe because, not everybody can see it and can be dark or whatever. But the one thing that you do give up, and this kind of comes back to the point of most people don't realize that there's a tunnel under 141 up in Johns Creek, is you lose any opportunity to create a distinctive point in the city where somebody could say, that pedestrian bridge across 141, and if Johns Creek had one, you could say that and know exactly where they're talking about, whereas
you can't,
with a tunnel, unless you lose that. And so, but there is some references to some of the master plans we've had in the past of the need for grade separated crossing down at the Target, Publix, Dick's Sporting Goods area. And our pedestrian safety task force also identified that as a need. Okay. And some of the members of that have contended that it should be done first before the one at the town center.
Right.
And the reason for that is because their in their opinion, there are more people who need to walk that live and work in that area than up at the town center, which may or may not be, the case, but okay. It is important to note that the reason the city is moving forward with the one at the town center is not because there has been any kind of a determination that the need is greater in one or the other. It's the fact that the town center one is much farther along already. We had not, up until recently, the other one had not been looked at. It had not been submitted as a, what should be, in some people's opinion, a primary location for a bridge. So the town center has had years of looking at it. So we've got property already acquired, the necessary. We've had preliminary meetings with Department of Transportation on making sure that the span is wide enough to ensure that they can widen it one day and all these other things. And so geotechnical reports, utility deconfliction, environmental impacts, that stuff has been done. And so if we said, the first bridge we're going to do is down at Target
You'd have to do the whole thing.
We're a year behind on that one just because of all those things that we have to do, and we don't have property. No point has the city made the call that one is a higher priority than the other, and it is entirely feasible that there could be two one day. That's for mayor and council's decision, but it's just one by virtue of it being looked at a lot longer is ahead of time. And then the last thing is instead of just hitting the pause button, mayor and council are like, look, we feel more comfortable that instead of waiting, as some people have submitted, for us to determine the need, is to go ahead and put it in so that there's no rolling of the dice that, we'll wait until somebody gets run over and then we'll, the old adage of you get a traffic signal only after somebody gets killed type of thing. Mayor and council are like, look, we're not sure, the town center's not in for us to know the exact number of people that are going to cross, but we don't, even one that could have a interaction with a car is too many. That's what they're saying.
And I can appreciate what they're doing. They were elected to be leaders, and they're leading. So they're making choices, and like you said before, and like I think we're all adults, we understand, not everyone can be happy. There will be people making certain choices, and other people don't want those choices. Now, prior to you becoming city manager, choices were made. The choice to put the bridge there was discussed originally, and not the lower southern part of 141. So there was a choice, just to be honest and frank, there was a choice made at one point, obviously, and that was
to start the due diligence at that location,
correct.
Yes.
So there was a choice being made. Now, whether that was the correct choice, we're not even saying the fact that you were able to make the budgeting the way you were able to and be able to, within that budget, have possibly two bridges, two pedestrian areas, front and down on 141, was a good thought to be able to do, actually. Because obviously, according to the task force, there's a call for some work to be done there for pedestrian crossing and safety.
Clearly there are people that cross there at grade. I mean,
absolutely.
I've seen them.
Yeah.
So that's not, and again, one is enough, in my opinion. If there's somebody who's crossing on a regular basis, even one person, if you can deconflict that person from having to interact with an automobile, it's better.
Yeah, for sure.
So, there's no doubt that there is a need. I mean, of course, you could make that argument that there needs to be a pedestrian bridge, across Holcomb Bridge near Spalding, or across Holcomb Bridge near Peachtree Corner Circle, there are a number of locations where we have a higher number of pedestrians, so it's just a matter of going. But
you have to prioritize. But I see more of a residential and a more commercial area, like where the Dick's Sporting Goods is.
Yes, I do too.
Right? Because
I do too.
There's apartments down there, high density living. And eventually, maybe, within a decade or 15 years, that whole area will be redeveloped again with mid-rises. Anything's possible. So having that ability to be able to do that over 6 lanes eventually,
right, And clearly, the two locations we're talking about are the two most obvious locations where we would have the biggest bang for our buck.
To move on, I just want to say that I want to thank Prototype Prime for letting us use their podcast studio. They're a startup incubator here in Peachtree Corners that started out in October 2016 with 2 companies and 3 employees. And today they're dealing with 15 startup companies sharing space here in 12,000 square plus feet, because the whole building is being used at this point. It may eventually be purchased through a grant, right, I think?
That is correct.
So, and that was discussed in the State of the City by Mike Mason. We've discussed that before. So anything further? And so thank you, Prototype Prime, for sponsorship on this. Anything further on that development?
Well, yeah, so upstairs, an additional 12,500 square feet we're finishing up. In fact, we have the final walkthrough tomorrow afternoon on the punch list for the renovation of upstairs.
I heard that. Okay.
So on Monday, we will essentially be able to move into the space. We have 2 companies that did not exist before Prototype Prime existed. Mm-hmm. They created themselves in Prototype Prime and have grown, and they are, you want to call it, graduating to upstairs. Okay. And will be paying full rent on some of the space upstairs because they've grown. Yeah. And one of them has about 20 employees, and they did not exist in Sighton.
And they do...
you would ask me that. I mean, there's so many here, I get confused as to what they do. But, so we're proud of, having organically, we'd have helped cultivate a new, company that didn't exist and maybe would never have existed if Prototype Prime had not been created and created this incubator to help. And so we're expanding into the top floor, and we have an event on August 2nd in which we're not only going to cut the ribbon on the space, but we have an exciting announcement with with Georgia Tech. The president of Georgia Tech will be here, and him and the mayor will be announcing a expansion of our partnership with Georgia Tech beyond the current one we have, which is with their incubator, support organization called ATDC. Right. We have a partnership with them. They provide some services and support and consulting to our teams here. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to expand our partnership with Georgia Tech. So we're going to be announcing that, and we'll be using some of the space upstairs for this partnership we're announcing. So we're pretty excited about, it's a big deal in the tech incubator world if you got partnerships with Georgia Tech. I mean,
that's a big deal.
I mean, they're a major player in the
can't wait to
technology.
Find what that is.
Yeah, so
that'll be cool. We have a question from the audience.
All right.
From a viewer, Sydney. She's asking, can you please tell us what the status is for dedicated bike paths, meaning not riding with cars? I believe this part was part of the city plan, and I'm curious how this is progressing.
I'm assuming she's talking about our multi-use trail, which, is a trail that, with a couple of exceptions in some cases where you may have an extenuating circumstance, it's a 12-foot wide paved path for the sole purpose of having multiple uses like walking, running, biking. So we have an 11-mile master plan, and we're just picking away at it. We're getting ready to execute the next phase of that here shortly in certain locations of the city. Other ones are under review. We've got an exciting section of it along Crooked Creek. What would that be? Southwest of Holcomb Bridge.
Yes.
That section, we got a grant, and it's under design, and that'll be a really nice section because you'll be away from development along the Crooked Creek corridor. We've got sections of it going in West Tech, in Tech Park, West Tech Drive, and around the lake inside of Technology Park. We've already added on one side of Technology Park itself the multi-use trail, the super sidewalk, so to speak. So we're putting in, we've got about $1.5 million that we appropriate every year on multi-use trail
and how
efforts.
How long do you think? I mean, right now you're not. We don't have like half of it done yet, but
no.
Any idea?
Like how long will it be till we do all 11 miles?
I mean, progression or halfway through. How?
I mean, you're probably talking. It a little bit depends. Probably 5 years plus or minus a year or two either way.
To do the whole thing.
The whole thing, and the reason that there's some uncertainty is because in some cases we find, and I don't know, maybe this shouldn't be surprising, but we get resistance from certain organizations or property owners that they don't want the trail near them at all.
Yeah, because of privacy issues or
or the perception that crime will increase or people have greater access. And so you have certain instances where they're like, no, we don't want it. And the only way for us to do it regardless would be for us to condemn it.
For the easement of that
Correct.
path.
And we don't really want to do that for this if we can help it.
Right.
We also...
a good example of a developer helping along is the 900 unit former 5-serve property. Isn't there going to be a trail that runs through there as well?
No. Echo Lakeside put in their section. Now, Fiserv has internal paths for those who will be living there, and they've got to put an enhanced sidewalk out on East Jones Bridge along there. But with Fiserv, what you're probably talking about is you're talking about the property down along the river that will want to reserve as a conservation easement of some sort to potentially be part of what one day might be a system along the Chattahoochee, through at least North Metro Atlanta. That's still to happen. They've been amenable to doing that, but that property down there was not part of the...
Okay.
So it just depends. I mean, so the timing will depend if we have to adjust. We have had in certain cases where, because again, we don't want to be too heavy-handed, we've had to go back and re-look at maybe ways to get to ultimately the same place, but you have to do it in a roundabout way. And when you do that, you got to start all over. Then you got to get into title searching, environmental impacts, and then you start again, redesign oftentimes, where you got to have slope and, drainage, take all that kind of stuff. And then the other thing that can prolong it is there are instances, especially in the commercial side, where you have an organization, the lake that the path that we're putting around the lake is one example where you have one of the owners of the properties, despite the fact that this path will be something that's at their back door, their employees can just walk right out there and have a great little thing to take breaks or whatever. They don't want to donate the property to the cause. So they're like, you have to pay me. Yeah. And so when that happens, that's fine. And we have in some cases, it's disappointing. You would think that they would realize that it improves the value of their property overall and the marketability of their building. But when we do, that just means that that's money that could have gone to the construction of a trail that instead has to go to just the purchase of it. And so
we should shame those people.
Yeah,
publicly.
Unfortunately, yes, maybe one day we will. Who knows?
Need a list of who we're paying for property and just shame them into, it's like, I know there's property rights. You can't force people to do things. But in this regard,
technically for public good, you can. Yeah, you can force them to sell you. Yes, I mean, you still are purchasing it, but yeah. So some of them are like, yeah, you can have it if you pay us fair market value, or they come up with some random amount, and we just have to make a decision. So that's been disappointing. Although I've done this before. I came from a community that was at the other end of what is really the Silver Comet Trail.
Yes, love
which
that
is
place.
the Chief Ladiga Trail in Alabama. And so we were pulling the trail in closer to our downtown to where it would actually culminate in the multimodal facility that Anniston, Alabama has, which has an Amtrak station, a Greyhound station, the local bus system, and cab all together
All
in
in one
one.
hub.
And you would be able to cycle, that would be the terminus of the Silver Comet / Chief Ladiga. But we had about 6 miles we were coming in, and you'd be surprised how many people fight it.
Yeah. Well, you have another fight on your hands, too, it seems, because trying to put in that roundabout, not to change subjects, but how's that going with that roundabout at Medlock and Peachtree Corner Circle?
Well, speaking of that, I mean, that is one where there had to be an improvement of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it had been a signal, there needed to be turn lanes added, and everything. So the intersection had to grow.
Right.
Unavoidable, whether we did a big signalized intersection or roundabout, but that's all been designed or whatever. We're literally, and so we have four corners we got to deal with, really, and like 6 property owners, and a couple of the property owners wanted to buy a small Caribbean island for the amount of money that they wanted. There was like wanting 500% of appraised value.
Was that the corner that was purchased on spec? Or was that...
No. We own that one. The one that has the house.
Okay,
yeah,
right.
we
So
got it
we
with
own
that was
one.
part of the Chile parcel.
So which side is that? That's...
I'm not going to go into which ones are...
Not the church side or the...
Well, I mean, there's a bunch of other parcels that are there, but, it wouldn't even close. I mean, you're 6 figures off, from appraised value to what they wanted, and it would have been fiscally irresponsible for us to pay.
I would think.
I mean, we broke it down. One of my staff members, one of the property owners wanted so much money that if you broke it down into per square foot, it equaled the square foot value of property in Lower Manhattan in New York City.
So what's the next steps?
Well, so the next step is council approved the condemnation process about, a month ago?
Oh, okay.
So we are
in the process of doing that.
So
for those people that don't understand, that condemnation doesn't mean a seizure of property without payment. So it's with payment of market value or better.
Or better, that's correct. So the process is just really, condemnation is just where, because fortunately it happens in the public good. In this case, an intersection had to be expanded. We had to have more property.
Right.
And some people just didn't want to particularly be cooperative. And so we need them to sell it to us. So once you start it, what happens is there is a judge who is appointed as what is called a special master.
Right.
And that special master, and there's certain different approaches, but oftentimes special master comes in and the city will tap an organization to appraise it. The property owner will retain or allow another appraiser on their behalf to appraise it. And then those 2 appraisers agree on a third appraiser to also appraise it. And then the special master gets these values, and then he or she considers various things and comes up with a value, and then the city pays it and you move on. So it has to be, it's a purchase. Right,
it is a purchase. And I think there's actually, not that I'm an accountant, but there's a tax advantage anyway. It's not like such a bad deal, because normally if you sell a piece of property, you have to turn that property within like 6 months of the income from that property. Laws may have changed a little bit on the accounting, but in condemnation, that's not the case. That stretches out longer, a year or 2 or something like that, before you roll that money into something else. Christina Nichols would like to congratulate on the expansion and partnership with GT, with Georgia Tech, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christina.
We're excited, too.
Other things on the agenda that I'm just going through a little bit of what the State of the City went through with Mike Mason. And
let me bring up, while you're doing that, we're talking about pedestrian improvements. At the council meeting, council also adopted an ordinance creating a Sidewalk Bank.
What is a Sidewalk Bank?
So Sidewalk Bank is a bank, essentially a bank account that's set up, and it's like a land bank or, sometimes you have a public art bank, and the bank comes from a bank account, and it is an account set up for a developer to pay into, to get, deposit money into for sidewalks if the property that they're developing, there's a reason why they shouldn't put the sidewalk at that location. So we currently have a requirement that if a property is being developed along a public right-of-way,
Right.
and it's not a private residential, development. Now,
It's
single
commercial.
family. I mean, if you had a multifamily developer, they would have to do this too. Like the town homes going in on the town center, the section that they're building along Medlock Bridge, they've got to put in a sidewalk along that section.
Okay.
So we have an ordinance requiring, if you're developing along a public right-of-way, that portion of the right-of-way that you're improving,
Right.
they have to put in a sidewalk if there's not one there, and streetlights if there are not one there. As a one-time, that's
Sure,
part of their
improvement.
pretty common. So that as parcels get developed, your public infrastructure improves.
Right. Through all the people's money, through development money.
Correct. Yeah, so this doesn't come out of any
Budget.
residents, wallets, or no taxes or fees that that go on the residents. But so a developer has to do this. Well, there are instances where that's not feasible, or literally feasible. Like maybe there's an environmental impact that you can't get around. Maybe it's cost prohibitive. Like you would have to, it's at the edge of something. You'd have to almost have elevated sidewalks. It doesn't make sense.
So did this come about because of a specific thing? Because, it doesn't just happen that someone decides to do a sidewalk bank. Is there a specific
Sure it
instance?
does. No, you're right. It does. Yeah, there was an incident in which we had a large industrial tenant of the city that was expanding. And they were expanding in an industrial area of the city. And there is a small public road, but it's really an access road because it's a dead end into an industrial area. Okay. It's got industrial place all around there, and so per our ordinance, they would have needed to develop a part of this with a sidewalk, and it doesn't make sense.
I can agree with that.
So instead of them putting it there, we had the value. That there's an equation on you determine value, and they made a contribution, or will, with the Sidewalk Bank, they've agreed to it.
Right.
Make a contribution to the Sidewalk Bank for us to take that money and put sidewalks elsewhere in the city that make more sense.
Okay. And that makes sense. You don't want to put sidewalks to nowhere.
Correct.
That no one's going to use.
Or sometimes where it's cost prohibitive to where you got to put in I've had instances in other cities where you have a location again that you have a drop off, and you would end up having to put a sidewalk up on pilings and cantilevered off the road, and you're just like, it just doesn't make sense if you don't have that. So we're little things a little bit more sidewalks and a little bit safer way to walk around the city.
Cool. That was great that they did that. Some of the other highlights I think was the Hotel Indigo, the Charlie Roberts property as far as the apartments. Any progress on that? Because we keep hearing, and Mayor Mason also said in his, I watched the video.
Good, there you go.
And the Hotel Indigo has to begin building first before anything happens with the apartment building. At least that's what.
Yes, that's true. Once the parcel starts to get developed, Roberts Properties has to do the hotel to a certain phase. They can't advance through each phase of the project on the apartment side until the hotel side has already advanced through that phase.
So he still has he provided the franchise papers? Has he bought into the Indigo franchise?
Yes, my understanding he has.
He has. Okay.
But again, now he has 3 years to develop the parcel.
Right.
That was the agreement.
Right. And if he doesn't do it within 3 years and leaves it the way it is.
Well, it just reverts back to what it was before they authorized the rezoning. Or the special use permit, I guess, is what it was.
So there's an expiration on this? So 3-year expiration.
There was terms so that, kept him motivated.
Okay.
So
it goes back to the way it was before. The way it was before, though, allowed him to do what?
it was commercial.
Okay, that's right. It was C2, actually.
Correct.
Okay, cool. So he couldn't do apartments.
It wouldn't be mixed use. I mean, he could come back. I mean, there's always could ask for an extension if he could prove that there was some reason. But look, I do know that he's working on it, so I don't want to impugn his effort at all. Right. It takes time.
Yes,
I mean, I expected it at least to be a year before there was anything that was visual to your, average citizen driving by, because he can't go too far into design everything until he had the rezoning. Then once he does, then he's got to get the engineers and the architects on board and financing in place. And
that takes time for all that, especially with two types of developments going on there.
Absolutely. So, it doesn't surprise me. Fiserv is going to be no different. It could be even longer.
Yeah, they could be.
Because it's 2 way bigger. And there's no expiration on them, but I mean, it could be years and years, because that's a complicated large development.
It's amazing. Going to the town center and the town green, at this point, I think that's just fairly moving along, it sounds like. And the deck is there. It's being worked on, the parking deck. Anything special, anything new there we should know about?
I mean, the buildings themselves are moving along well. By the end of this calendar year, all the buildings should be finished with the final certificates of occupancy. There's some space that the tenant improvements might still be going on, after December 31st. Cine Bistro is going to be beginning of the year before they actually get the inside done so that they actually are open for business.
So no new businesses will open actually before the spring, I'd imagine?
No, you'll have a few.
Oh, really?
It's just that some of the space you won't. I mean, some of them, some of them have been moving on, and they've literally been the day that we gave them a rough, we permitted the rough in on the inside. They were standing at the door wanting to know if they can start tenant improvements.
Really?
Some of them, others are going to wait until it's all completely done, and they'll get to it when they get to it. So it'll be varying times.
So there might be some stores open in December for the holidays. Well, that could be interesting.
If they're ready to do their tenant improvements fast, it is entirely possible. Now, our town green, given weather, and that's an outside one, that the developer of the town center was a little bit behind because of the rain. So they were not able to turn over the town green part to us to do it until about 2 months late.
Okay.
So we were hoping to have the town green done in a ribbon cutting in, around Christmas, but now it'll be spring.
Probably better that way.
Well, I mean, it's nice to do something over the holidays, but you're right. We wouldn't have had any activities until late spring anyway.
Yeah.
So we're not missing anything.
And you guys are in the middle of hiring or looking for a town green manager? A town center manager or town green manager? Yes.
Town green, not town center. And that's somebody, and it's really, we're looking for a firm to help us.
Right. That's
not an individual. We're not hiring anybody within, but we're looking for a firm, which I guess in theory could be a one-person firm. But, it's going to be a consultant that we put on retainer, but we need somebody to organize, market, attract, organize, and support the activities on the town green.
Event manager,
correct. It's a special event manager, and they'll do everything from go out and try to find really good ones and coordinate with the other municipalities so we don't cannibalize stuff and try to find unique things that maybe you don't find at some of these other town centers, schedule it here, do the things that we need to do to support it.
Right. Now, I noticed that when I was looking through that description for the RFP, or it's not an RFP really, but the city expects to do maybe 20 events a year over a varied amount of holidays and stuff. So there's some guidance of what the city would like to see happening.
There is, and those are the events in which we'll have some degree of a direct involvement. There are others that we're going to fully support there being some grassroots stuff happening out there. There could be somebody who wants to teach yoga in the early mornings on the town green, and we're like, absolutely have at it, and they go out there and they use it. So some of it won't require our involvement, and some of it will.
All right. Does a political question, but you've been involved in not city politics per se, but you've been involved in lobbying the Capitol and such. Do you see the Kemp election as far as nominee for the Republican Party, and maybe, no doubt, maybe even eventually the governorship? Do you see his election as something that's friendly or not friendly to cities?
I have no reason to believe that any of the candidates are not of any party for any of the positions are unfriendly to cities.
Okay.
I mean, some tend to be, in general, a little bit more than others. Mm-hmm. But I have no reason to, and of course, the city would officially not weigh in on that, and I certainly would not weigh in officially. But I have no reason to believe. I mean, let's face it, cities are the true foundation of communities. Mm-hmm. It's what we all identify with. It's where nobody, and we know this. Our area is a perfect example. If I was in another state or another country, and somebody asked where I was from. If you get, I'm from America or Georgia. Oh, where at Georgia? You're not going to say something like Gwinnett County or Fulton County. You're going to say the first closest city name.
Right.
Atlanta. Now, if somebody's like, oh, I'm from there too, where specifically, then you'll know, okay, they know, now I can say something. But cities are what we identify with. Cities are where, and so that's why most of the, elected officials kind of have that same philosophy. Sometimes they think that the state can make decisions better than the local elected officials, which we all at the local level tend to take some exception to. I mean, and it's just the logic of, do you really think somebody under the Gold Dome knows better of what should happen in Peachtree Corners than the local elected officials who live here, and are here all the time? I submit to you not, with maybe, with the exception of input from people like, Scott Hilton or others who live here. But anyway, I mean, we're, as civically minded, citizens of this country, and we'll vote and, support them. And, we love the democratic process and look forward to working with whomever gets elected in these offices.
Do you see any, or do you hear any new laws that may be, or new bills, actually, not laws, new bills that may be coming to the Capitol that the city should be familiar with? I know you're involved in sometimes lobbying some of these bills.
Yes. Now, generally, our lobbying is twofold. One, it's to keep an eye on bills that materialize that could harm us. And by harm, that generally is in the context of taking away local control.
Right. Okay.
Perfect example of that was this last session. We didn't have it, although there was some talk on members of council to do this, that if there were multifamily structures that were above a certain height, like taller than 3 stories or something, the cities were going to require it to be steel.
Right, I remember that.
And the state stepped in and said, they were lobbied by the timber industry, who didn't want to have that requirement because it could have decreased. And the state said, no, we should decide what cities can and cannot do. And so Johns Creek, I believe Sandy Springs, maybe even Dunwoody, I think all had that in already. And that was just a local decision they wanted. And sometimes the state steps in and thinks that it, so.
Right. So they passed that bill. I think
they
it was
did.
signed.
They did. So, those are the kind of things. Or we sometimes have a particular thing that we want to see because it would help us.
Sure.
One of the things that is being considered is the mayor's working on a nuisance, blighted property initiative. And one of the things that we have found that's a little bit unique to us, and it's prevented us from maybe doing something we'd like to, and that is there is enabling legislation in Georgia. State law allows for a blighted property tax. And what that is if a property is deemed to be blighted, based on the definition the state has,
Right.
then a municipality that has a blighted property ordinance can assess an additional millage, an additional property tax millage against that particular parcel and that particular parcel only for the purposes of generating extra revenue that can go back into the property to bring it out of its blighted condition, to, mitigate or remedy the nuisances. A lot of cities do. A lot of cities do it. Here's the problem. You think that's great because, you try to do the carrot. But sometimes the carrot's not enough. Some people only respond to the stick. So it's a great stick because you can target a blighted property and a blighted property only. But the mechanism to do it is the mechanism to levy a special millage for that is not by just deciding what it is and doing it. It's a multiplier of your current property tax millage. So the only way a city can do it is it can multiply against its current property tax millage rate and apply it to that property. So let's say we had a 4 mil property tax rate. The city could say, if you're blighted, we're going to multiply that 4 mils by, we're going to double it in that property, but you have to times it by something. Well, ours is 0, so any number multiplied by 0 is 0.
Okay.
So we can't use that mechanism because we have a 0 millage. So we kind of feel like it's a little bit punitive for cities who have a 0 millage rate. And so there's going to be consideration of maybe seeing if we can come up with wording that we might be able to get some support from our delegation to the General Assembly on changing the wording enough so that cities that have a 0 millage aren't punished.
I didn't realize that. They didn't dawn on me until
we
you just
didn't
said
even,
that.
those are the little things that we might, that's just an example of something that may be an initiative we take
I've seen blighted property, not necessarily here in Peachtree Corners, but in Duluth and some other places where it's just an abandoned shopping center. And they just, the parking lot's cracked, the overgrown of weeds, becomes a place for maybe things to happen in. And you know what? And they're just holding on to it for years that.
And so this initiative that my staff and I have been kind of slowly getting together, for council to consider is got all that. It's also got vacant and foreclosed on registry stuff where if you had a vacant property or it was foreclosed, you have to register that property with the city so we can keep an eye on it better. And we know, just little things like that, but we put it all together and it'll be an initiative. And also adding criminal activity as a qualifying factor for blight.
Yeah. Because
not just the property condition, but if the property has more criminal activity on it than normal, that can be considered a qualifier for blight.
And I would think that, you would think that would be logical. So, because you don't want to be police called to a property because kids are just hanging out and doing things.
It actually could look good or even be maintained good, but if there's a lot of criminal activity, that contributes to the blight in the air. So anyway, that's all being worked on. That's a pretty big initiative that, we're going to try to see if we can't get something in front of mayor and council by the end of the calendar year.
Okay.
But,
that sounds great. That's being proactive. We're getting towards the end of the hour. We got. I did want to ask you about. There was a consideration of resolution to call for a special election.
Glad you brought that up.
So not special election like someone's running for office because someone else resigned, but this is really about alcoholic beverages.
It's
on
what
Sunday,
we call the Brunch Bill.
The Brunch Bill, yes.
So the General Assembly adopted or amended state law as it relates to Sunday alcohol sales. And there was an initiative to allow cities that had already had the referendum allowing for Sunday alcohol sales to amend the requirements around it. And the original law allowed for an establishment that served food, like more than half of their revenue is generated from the sale of food, that they could start serving alcohol at 12:30 on Sunday. State law was amended to allow for that to start as early as 11 a.m. on Sunday, hence the brunch, because some of the restaurateurs are saying, my brunch crowd that shows up, they want their mimosas. But the requirement to do that was that the communities that wanted to consider it have to put it on a ballot for a referendum. So mayor and council on Tuesday night officially called for an election. So in November, even though we don't have any local races, we will have one question on the ballot.
That can only be voted at City Hall.
That's correct. That's our only. So unfortunately, that day, if you want to vote, you're going to have to go to two different locations. Right. City Hall for the Brunch Bill,
right,
and then you have to go to your county polling precinct
for the rest of
the stuff.
Yeah.
So
my question to that then is,
and then, by the way, people are like, why? We also wonder why. We're the only county in the state of Georgia in which the County Board of Elections doesn't run all the elections inside the county limits. Only one in Georgia.
Really?
Everywhere else, the County Board of Elections runs the election. Now, city elections that they run, the cities pay for them to do it. You pay the County Board of Elections for the voting machines, for the poll workers to come out, all the administrative support. You pay them a dollar amount, so they're not losing money. But the city doesn't run it. The Board of Elections, people trained to do it, they're in charge.
So now,
here,
that still has to be done at the City Hall.
Yes, the city has to run it. So we
but I'm saying even
have one location. We just do it at City Hall.
Okay, so everything's done at City Hall. Now this
for municipal elections.
So this special election, which can run 40, 50,000, right? I mean,
yeah, 30, 35,000.
People bandy that about. It's like 32, 40,000.
Well, because with one question, if you have multiple candidates, sometimes it can get the ballots are a little bit more money, and
So the county forces you guys to do this. So the other question was, so you have to run this.
Correct.
And my question was, because when I was looking at the resolution, it's just because I'm just not smart enough on some things, and I just saw it. Maybe it's just a language thing to me. It said something about that as long as you're on the municipal registration list and you decide to vote, you can vote. Now, I don't know. If I'm registered to vote, I still can vote. That part of the resolution doesn't mean anything really, because the way it reads, it almost reads like I have to be on the municipal voting list.
No, if you're registered to vote, you're registered to vote. Okay. The reason that we feel the need to put that language in there is because some people think, well, because the city has its own polling location, its own poll workers, it runs its own election, that you actually have to get registered a different way.
Right. It sounds
That's not the case.
Okay.
And it's just clarifying that if you're registered to vote, you're good.
Okay, because it says not on the municipal registration list. That's what was concerning to me, as opposed to the state. Voter list.
No, yeah. So
we're good there.
But yeah, normally, again, the way it should be is that I really would love to pay the County Board of Elections to run it.
They should be the ones that should be paid.
They're the experts. We have experts now, too, because we have to. My city clerk knows as much about this as anybody. But it's just, disappointing that you can't have our question just be added to the same ballot that you're going to be voting on for all of the state and national election stuff.
They have to take special
So we're going to have to go to a different precinct, do all those, and then if I want to be civically active on and answer the question on the Brunch Bill, I got to go to a second location.
Yeah. Amazing. We spent an hour talking to Brian Johnson, City Manager of Peachtree Corners, as we do every month right after the City Council meeting. It's always the fourth Thursday of the month. And I appreciate Brian doing this with me. Answers lots of questions. We had a good amount of people watching, and I'm sure over the next few days there will be even more people watching. If you want to post any further questions or your comments, do so at the bottom of this video. Certainly if it's questions that I can bring up to Brian either during the month or at the following meeting next month, I'll do that. Also, just again, thank you to Prototype Prime for allowing us to use their podcast studio. I do the Peachtree Corners Life podcast every week. When I don't have a guest, it's pretty much what's happening this week in Peachtree Corners, and it's about 15 minutes. But I do have a guest coming up, just so then you know. If you'd like to listen in, this will be August 9th. That's the next scheduled time for a interview on Thursday, 8:30, a live Facebook feed and podcast with Beth Moore. She's the Democratic candidate running for an assembly seat that currently the incumbent is Scott Hilton. She'll be my guest at Thursday on August 9th. obviously passed the special elections. This is really for the November elections, and she's the Democratic nominee. She'll be my guest, so feel free to listen in. If you have questions, post it at the bottom where the comments are, and certainly I'll put those questions to Ms. Moore. And for our Ed Hour with Alan Kaplan, that's our education hour. We do that at Prototype Prime 2. That's August 23rd, and we're planning a special guest for that as well. So thank you again. Leave your comments. If you're listening to the podcast, please leave a review on iTunes. We're on Spotify now. So if you use Spotify, you can download, just search Peachtree Corners Life. iHeartRadio, Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube, any place that you get podcasts, you can find this podcast. Thank you.